Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to the witnesses. And Mr. Barrera, I want to follow up a little bit on your discussion about the diversion of taxpayer dollars, funds that were legally put forward by the members of Congress, and the thought of, because you got two tracks. One is the dollars that were approved and appropriated and are being clawed back. And then there is the desire to shift funding. I'm a big believer in efficiency. I'm a big believer in outcomes. I want us to make sure that our kids are getting the best education possible, but I too am concerned. And so first, I want to follow up on your comments about IDEA. You noted that our failure to fully fund it can be a barrier to our students reaching their full potential. How would fully funding IDEA enable districts to better support students with disabilities? I mean, we're shifting money potentially that could be going to fully funding IDEA.
Absolutely. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, commonly known as IDEA, was created with the promise that the federal government would shoulder 40% of the costs associated with providing special education services to students across the country. This was not just a symbolic promise, but a commitment to ensure that children with disabilities would have equal opportunities in classrooms alongside their peers. Yet decades later, that promise has never been fulfilled. The federal government continues to cover only a fraction of that 40%, leaving the overwhelming responsibility to local school districts and state governments that are already stretched thin. The result is a system where districts are forced to make impossible choices, often cutting from other areas of their budget just to try and meet the most basic needs of students with disabilities. In many districts, this underfunding translates into tens of millions of dollars being pulled directly from their general funds.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator Blunt Rochester. And again, the $58 billion going into this tax credit private school scheme is 4 times the amount that the federal government is currently spending on special education. Were the federal government to meet its responsibility and fund 40% of the costs of special education, it would take an enormous burden off of our district and districts and around the country, states around the country that are picking up the tab. So we estimate in San Diego Unified that the federal government meeting its responsibility would result in over $50 million that we're right now spending out of our general fund. That were that money available to us, here's what we could do. We could hire 3 to 4 full-time literacy teachers in every single one of our high-need schools who could be working side by side with classroom teachers, building their capacity to implement evidence-based literacy strategies. We could be hiring 5 to 10 paraeducators, special education aides that are with the students all during the day. So these are investments that, of course, would help students with disabilities, but would help every student in the school were the federal government to meet its responsibility.
Right now, one of the most glaring problems in the education system is the imbalance in how federal funds are being distributed. On one hand, there is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which remains severely underfunded despite a long-standing promise to cover 40% of the costs for special education. On the other hand, an enormous sum of $8 billion has been directed into private school tax credit programs. To put that number into perspective, it is 4 times greater than what the federal government currently spends on special education for millions of children who depend on those resources just to have a fair chance at learning. This contrast reveals a disturbing set of priorities, where money is flowing into schemes that benefit a limited number of families, while public schools, which serve the vast majority of America's children, are left struggling to meet their obligations. When billions are funneled toward private initiatives, it might sound like an expansion of school choice, but in practice it means less equity and more inequality. Private tax credit programs generally benefit families who are already in a position to take advantage of them, often those with resources or access to private institutions. Meanwhile, the students who remain in public schools, including those with disabilities, English learners, and children from low-income households, find themselves in classrooms that are underfunded and overburdened. This imbalance exacerbates the divide between wealthy and disadvantaged communities, deepening educational inequality rather than addressing it. The sheer size of the $58 billion allocation makes the imbalance impossible to ignore.
And do you think block granting IDEA, as the administration has proposed, would improve outcomes? And how would your district respond if that happened?
Well, our district would respond in the way that we have always, which is to prioritize all of our students, including students with disabilities. The concern, of course, is that if IDEA or the funding for special education, paltry as it is, that's coming from the federal government, were block granted to states, what is the guarantee that those states are going to actually meet the needs of students with disabilities? It would be a really easy thing to do for a state or a school district to say, it's too hard to educate with students with disabilities, so we're going to use that money for something else. So if you don't ensure that money is actually there to benefit students with disabilities, I think we're very likely to see a crisis in special education in the country.
Under a block grant system, the federal government would hand over a set amount of money to states with little to no strings attached on how that money should actually be spent. While the concept of flexibility might sound appealing at first glance, it carries enormous risks for students with disabilities because there would be no guarantee that states would direct those funds to the children who need them most. Without federal oversight and accountability, states could easily redirect the money toward other priorities, leaving vulnerable students at the mercy of budget cuts, political shifts, or local decisions that fail to recognize the importance of special education. For decades, the federal role in special education has been critical because it sets a standard of equity that all states must follow. Every child with a disability is guaranteed the right to a free and appropriate public education, and federal funding is meant to support that promise. If the money becomes a block grant, the foundation of that guarantee starts to crumble. A state facing budget pressures might decide that investing in infrastructure or balancing deficits takes precedence over maintaining services for students with disabilities. The result would be devastating: fewer aides in classrooms, reduced access to therapies, and limited individualized support, all of which are essential for students to thrive. The danger of block granting IDEA isn't just theoretical. History has shown that when federal funds lose their specific purpose, they often get diluted or redirected. What starts as money for a clear cause ends up spread across unrelated needs. For children with disabilities, who already face systemic challenges, this could mean being pushed even further to the margins. Families would find themselves fighting harder than ever to secure the services their children are entitled to, while schools would struggle to prioritize special education in the face of competing demands. Instead of leveling the playing field, block grants could create a patchwork of unequal systems where the quality of education depends entirely on which state a child happens to live in. The gravity of this risk has not gone unnoticed. Leaders from both Republican and Democratic administrations, spanning decades from Nixon to Biden, have come together to warn Congress against block granting IDEA.
Earlier this month, former high-level officials from the Department of Education's Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services and the Office of Special Education Programs sent a letter to the Appropriations Committee urging Congress not to block grant IDEA, close the department, or transfer the department's responsibilities to the Department of Health and Human Services. This letter is a bipartisan plea to Congress and has been co-signed by officials from the administrations of President Biden, Trump, Obama, George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, Ronald Reagan, Carter, Nixon, and Ford. Chair Tuberville, I ask unanimous consent that this letter be entered into the record. I asked my colleagues also to consider this and to consider your comments as we move forward with FY 2026 appropriations bills. I have more questions for the record that I will submit to you, but I end my remarks as a parent whose children graduated from Delaware public schools. Um, we've done many things in our state. We have many different options. We have public school choice, we have charters, and I'm proud of the education they received, and I want more because I also have a granddaughter, my first grandchild, and I want our education system in this country to be the best. And so I hope that we can come together on this and not shift resources to places that don't need it when we have a lot of places in this country that do need the support. Thank you, and I yield back.
Senator King.